Hey guys, welcome back to Study Collab. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you how to learn a new language. In the IB, it is a requirement to take a second language. I took mine as Chinese B. I did that at standard level because there is no way I would have been able to do HL. Just basic standard level tips on how to study for language B. I just want to make a disclaimer that in previous years I had learned Chinese before, but it was at a very basic level. So studying IB, language B, was quite a big jump. And whilst my language skills did improve a lot over the course of the 2 years, by the end I don't think you necessarily have to be fluent to get a 7 in the subject. There are certain tips and revision strategies that you can learn and implement to achieve that high score. So I think Chinese was like one of my second highest subjects, and it was probably one of the more difficult ones for me to revise for just because it didn't really come naturally, so I had to work hard at it. But as I said, I'm like by no means fluent, and you don't have to be, but you just got to work hard at it, get that end result that you're looking for. So without further ado, I'm going to get into tip number 1. So my first tip is probably the biggest tip and the most important one, and that is to stay consistent. So with consistency, I just mean doing a little bit every day. I don't mean sitting down for like 3 hours every day to study Chinese. It could be 15 minutes, half an hour, whatever time you have to just like review vocab words, write an essay, or like do a reading passage. Whatever it is, you want to make sure you leave time in your schedule every day to look over the language, because over time your skills will build. No matter how good you are or if you're horrible, over time you'll get better. And if you're already really good, then staying consistent can help to look at those little nuances and where you need to improve. There are a few things that I did to stay consistent. The first one was always do your homework. It's a very simple thing to implement. If your teacher gives you homework, make sure you actually do it. Because whilst it does seem like a burden at the time, it does really help with consistency, because I'm sure that if my teacher didn't give me so much homework, I probably wouldn't have studied Chinese as much as I did. This is my Chinese binder that I had over the 2 years. And it's got a lot of worksheets. So in this binder I have booklets that we did in class, but also all the homework. So yes, a lot of homework. If we open her up, this is an example of like the homework. Actually, you know, what would be smart is to take it out. Good thinking. More often than not, we got given more than one because one just wasn't enough. So here I have one here, the front page, and also a second reading passage with just a bunch of questions in relation to it. On the topic of staying consistent, what I do is, if this seems like a lot of homework to complete in one sitting, I would do a little bit every day. Say for example, we had a week to do this and there were 2 reading passages. One week I might read through the passage and annotate the first day, because that itself is a process, especially in year 1 of the program where it was a really big jump in terms of like the vocab I needed to know. So even just like going to like translate each word that I didn't know took a lot of time. Maybe I spent one day doing that. The next day I would refresh my memory, read the passage again with all the translated things there, and then do the questions the next day. And then repeat that process for the second passage. It may take 4 days to complete the set, but you're breaking up the workload so it's not too much at once. It comes back to the revision technique of spaced repetition, where you're doing a little bit over time so you remember it for longer. What I'd also do with the homework was all the words I didn't know, so the highlighted ones, as you can see, there is a lot. I would compile them into Quizlet sets in relation to the core topics. So in the IB for language B, you have 3 core topics and then you study 2 optional ones. The core topics are what you use for your oral and also for readings. What I do is I put them into Quizlet sets, and that leads me on to my second tip, is to use Quizlet. So for things like reading, where you had to know a lot of vocab words, but not necessarily need to know how to write them, and using an online flashcard tool like Quizlet is really useful. Highly recommend it. I put the words that I didn't know from the reading passages into categorized Quizlet sets under each core topic. So by the end of the 2 years, as you can imagine, I did have a huge Quizlet set. I think it was like 500 terms or something ridiculous. Maybe every few days I'd go and flick through the Quizlet sets and just like test myself on a few words. There's a tool you can use, it's called the Learn tool. I found that the most useful tool on Quizlet. Like, a character would show up on the screen and you had to type the meaning to it. You'd keep going through the set and then the ones you kept getting wrong would come up more often, so you could target those, drill them in your heads until you knew it. So I highly recommend you use the Learn tool, especially for reading and recognizing characters, because you don't really want to waste time writing all these characters out when you only really need to know how to recognize it. For writing, it is a different story, but reading, you can use Quizlet, play the games. That will make your revision a little more enjoyable, especially if you don't really enjoy learning a new language. But the games like Scatter, Space something, those games are really fun. They make it a little more enjoyable and you're like revising without even knowing it. So what I'd also do with the Quizlet sets was, besides like the reading passages, I'd also, when I got closer to my exams, I'd make separate flashcard sets of specific like IB papers. So I might write like IB common terms from past papers. As I was doing past papers, I document words that were common and kept coming up, but also new vocab that I didn't know previously, and I'd put them into an IB related past paper Quizlet set. And then before my final exams or like mock exams or something, that would be the last thing I'd look at. So my third tip is something a little different. It's not really revising, but for a language in particular, you want to try and immerse yourself into the language as much as you can. So for example, one thing that I did was in year 12, in like the lead up to my mock exams or something, I changed the settings on my iPhone to all Chinese, and that sort of just forced me to read things that I would normally look at but in Chinese, so I'd have to process it, trying to figure out what it was saying. And that can sort of help with the skills you need in your reading paper, because chances are you're not going to understand every single word in a sentence, but you sort of have to decipher the meaning. I sort of try to practice the same thing by doing past papers, but also having a different language on your phone can help with that. Whatever you can do to, again, immerse yourself in the language, so you might watch TV shows in that language. Another example is whenever I went to watch a movie, there was always Chinese subtitles, so I'd like try and read it as much as I could. Because they were speaking in English, I could sort of like directly translate. I tried to like pick out characters I could recognize. Anything you can do to sort of stay consistent and like familiarize yourself with different words. Just keep practicing, I guess. That can help as well with learning a new language. I'm going to be completely honest and say that I did have a tutor for Chinese because I did find it my most difficult subject, and having someone there to like practice my orals specifically, get someone who was like a native speaker to help me improve like my tone and fluency and all of that was super useful and helpful, because I could like practice with them but also run my essays through her as well. It can be beneficial to your studies. It was the only subject I did have a tutor in, but I think if I were to have a tutor in any of them, it would have been Chinese, because it was the most useful in terms of learning a whole new language. But I do know that tutoring isn't accessible to everyone, and especially having a one-on-one tutor. So one thing you can do is go and practice with your friends in your class, because they will want to practice their skills as well. You could like test each other in terms of like trying to memorize an essay or like these words or whatever. Try and practice with people who are speaking the language as much as possible. If it's not accessible, you can always go to your teacher. They are most likely to help you out. So my fourth tip is more in relation to writing. There is a writing component in the IB, so you take paper 1, which is reading, paper 2, which is writing. Paper 2 for writing in language B was probably the hardest and most dreaded exam out of all of mine, just because I had no idea what was going to come up, and it wasn't like an English exam or like another subject that was in English where if I really didn't know, I could just make something up and try and get to the answer. But I felt like with language, because it was my second language, if something came up I had no clue on a topic I didn't know, there was no way I would have been able to make up vocabulary words that I could have used or like sentence structures. So I felt like I had to really know my stuff and get prepared for that paper. So what I actually did was that's about everything. So that's about everything I have for this video in terms of learning a new language and ways to revise for your language B. With that being said, I hope you found this video useful. Give it a thumbs up. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought. Subscribe to my channel for more study related videos and be notified by clicking the notification bell down below. Anyways, I'll see you in my next video. Bye!